And a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Institute of Hospitality's August webinar. I'm very pleased today that I'm joined by Carl from Epic Base, Christian from Tenzo, and Richard from S4 Labour. And each of them will give a brief introduction about themselves and their company in just a second. As you may know, I'm Alistair Sandel from the Institute. I'm Head of Professional Development. And this webinar, like all the other webinars, is being recorded. So if you're watching this offline and do have any questions, just please send an email in. The email address will be shown later. And if you're watching it online and live, good afternoon to you, whichever part of the world you're in. And your device should have a little box, probably on the right-hand side, bottom right-hand side, for enabling you to send questions in. We'll be taking questions throughout the course of the day. Throughout the course of the session rather, but I'll be tending to field them laterally as we go on from there. So without further ado, just before I introduce the three panelists today, and also it's fair to say that we're very international because we have panelists from Antwerp, from Tuscany and the south of France, but I'm in the UK, so we're grounded here. So the agenda today is on the screens in front of you, and it'll be a panel discussion in the main, and we find that these are probably the most productive and most interactive type of webinars, especially at this time of year. We'll go through the staff shortages, which everybody is facing at the moment, and employee engagement since the advent of the pandemic. We'll look how to streamline operations, and of course that is totally key because, you know, we have to obviously make profit, but the staff aren't out there, so we have to streamline our operations to give our guests the best service. We'll have a look at integrated solutions, and I know the three panelists today that are working all together. They work with their own companies, but they have complementary software. And is it sort of one solution to rule them, or is it integrated solutions? And they'll argue the toss on that particular case. And like everything, data is king these days, so it's decision making through the key metrics and forecasting future sales. And then, as I say, we'll do the questions and answers towards the end. So that's roughly the plan for today. Very relaxed, very informal. And without any further ado, perhaps I can hand over to you, Carl, to do an introduction, yourself and Epic Base.
Hey, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel discussion. My name is Carl. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Epic Base. And at Epic Base, we are concerned about food and beverage management, and we build software to help businesses streamline and optimize their back of house. So we are basically focusing on food costs, allergens, inventory, ordering, procurement, things like that.
Should I go and introduce myself now? Hi, I'm Christian. We say I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tenzo. In my previous life, I was a restaurateur, and one thing that was driving me crazy was how hard it was to get my hands on the data that lived in my inventory tool, my labor tool, my sales tool, and in particular get it in the hands of my GMs. On the floor that were making the decisions, you know, who were deciding how much staff to schedule, how much food to order in, you know, how to motivate the team and give them the information they needed to do that. And so I created Tenzo that really connects to all these different sources of data. So you could connect to Epic Base, it will connect to S4, it will connect to your POS, whether that's Lightspeed, Square, etc. Pull in all that data in real time and make it available on mobile, both iOS and Android, in the hands of your GMs on the ground.
Super, thanks very much, Christian. And over to Richard.
Hi, I'm Richard Hartley, Chief Innovation Officer at S4 Labour. S4 Labour, we focus on people, productivity and payroll. So all of your sort of human needs, from the scheduling right through to how effective people are, and then finally paying them. Prior to joining S4 Labour, I, like Christian, also ran restaurants, pubs and hotels for a number of different organisations, and then turned to the dark side. But I'm very pleased to be here, and thanks for inviting us to join, Alistair.
Yeah, you're very welcome, and I wouldn't say it's a dark side at all. So I think it's a great side of the industry. I was a hotel general manager for 20 years, and I turned to the dark side about 20 years ago as well. So I know the feeling. It's not a dark side; it's great. We're in a fabulous industry, and we're all here to help each other, which is really the point of this webinar this afternoon, because the hospitality industry, as we all know, has been absolutely decimated by the pandemic globally. There are signs of life in the UK at the moment, but it's manifested itself in huge staff shortages, and employee engagement has become key since the pandemic. What's your thoughts on that, Richard?
Listen, we're speaking to lots of operators, and we're sort of seeing, the staff shortages are really coming from two angles as we see it. Firstly, it's a big lack of supply, and that's mainly driven by the last 18 months and people being unable to travel. So when we look at our database and we look at the representation of UK employees versus non-UK, we've seen the number of UK employees rise as a proportion of the overall base. And that's, I guess, obviously down to Brexit a little bit, where it's now harder to come in. But equally, we've seen a lot of the workers from further afield, typically where we'd have maybe some Australian, New Zealand, South African workers heading towards the UK and sort of working in the bars and the like. We're seeing none of those people travelling over here, which I think kind of is part of the problem. Also, I was talking to one of the large pubcos only a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying how they've really struggled because so many of their managers have actually found new work while on furlough, as I think sort of many did, but have then actually sort of kept in those jobs. So the likes of Amazon or other sort of areas have picked up a lot of hospitality workers, and some people have gone, well, actually that lifestyle quite suits them. And it makes it challenging.
Yeah, no, that's true. Thank you for that. Thank you. Carl, your thoughts on that as well?
In regard of the employee shortage, I think when you have not enough people working for you, I think it's important that you optimize the way that they work. And when you don't find staff, what you basically need to focus on is making sure that they can save time on tasks that they do repetitively. And in some of those mundane tasks, like inventory counting, like ordering the right products, all of these things, there is a lot of time to be able to save. And you can actually optimize a little bit your restaurant in order to make sure that you can keep on giving the right quality of service to your customers. And in the end, that's what it's all about, is making sure that your customer feels appreciated and gets the service that they deserve.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. And it is all about the guest service, and you've got to maintain that, because they just will go away again and find somewhere that gives them the good service. So let me move on to you, if I may, Christian. Staff shortage is a huge issue at the moment. What data is important for operators to be successful, and how can we make this data work for them? And how can operators streamline operations through automation? $1 million question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and just a reflection on that initial on those labor shortages. I think there's one that we're debating today, which is really people who are working in hospitality, but then you have the whole supply chain shortages, which I think today we've seen McDonald's announce that they've got milkshake shortages in 1,250 of their locations because of there being, I think it's 100,000 drivers missing in the UK. And Nando's obviously closing 50 of their restaurants last week, turning off delivery in most of their restaurants. KFC also reporting this. So there's two parts to it. There's really the supply chain, which is partly affected by the pingdemic, as they like to call it these days, but also the Brexit or basically workers from abroad, but also the staff shortages in restaurants, which I think I totally agree with Richard's point on. They found an alternative job and they're very happy with it. So and just to bounce off this question, what Carl's comments about, what can you do? Basically, you're going to have a shortage of staff for the foreseeable future, at least. There are still 1.6 million people on furlough, but there's a big debate as to whether those 1.6 million are still in the UK or whether they're Europeans that have actually traveled back to their home country, and whether there actually is 1.6 million people there. But I think the best approach here is to assume that this is going to be ongoing for the next few months at least. So what can you do? I think the first point to make is what we've seen, and I think everyone who's had experience in hospitality, a happy team leads to happy customers. The point you were making, Alistair. And really, if you can give them the tools to make them able to do their jobs much more effectively, and that includes things like S4 Labor to make sure that you're scheduling the right number of people at the right time, Epic based to make sure that you're not spending ages on your inventory counts, etc. And also Tenzo making sure that they're not having to wait 15 minutes for a report to load or for this data to get into one place. So and there's lots of different elements that are important here in terms of what is the data they should be looking at. There is data around labor, sales, and inventory, which are the three key levers in the restaurant, as everyone knows. You can increase your sales, you can reduce your labor costs, you can reduce your inventory costs, but being able to see those three in real time, you're able to give feedback to your teams in a way where it can be constructive. Because when I was running restaurants, the data we'd have would be a week later once our accountants had put it all together. And at that point, no one can react to it, right? A week later, I can't remember what I did last Monday in terms of what was the average spend that the team achieved. But if you can tell them right after lunch, this is what you've done, or being able to see what you're wasting a lot of, so that you're able to really focus the team and say, these are the three top items we're wasting, let's make sure we don't do that. Or being able, for example, to see where are you regularly overscheduling or underscheduling staff every week, because the team might be copying the same rota week on week, because that's often the simplest way of doing your rota. You can identify those times quickly. You can address them, say, hey, we always put too many people on a Tuesday afternoon. Let's make sure we don't do that anymore. So that's some of the data points we get in the hands of GMs to make sure that they're able to react faster.
Yeah, very, very useful and very important. Richard, your thoughts on that, please?
Listen, I share it. I mean, Christian's very eloquent in the way he talks about such a massive data. Our challenge as sort of tech providers to the hospitality industry, or one of our challenges, is how do we make mundane tasks that little bit easier? The reason that we thought we had great ideas in sort of founding and creating tech solutions was kind of taking a problem that was either very difficult to do on a manual basis or quite time consuming to do, and make that easier, and giving people therefore the right information in their businesses to make better decisions. And we'll continue to try and do that, and we'll continue to try and work together with others to try and make those tasks easier and that data more accessible.
Yeah, that's very important. Thanks for that. Carl.
Yeah, actually, I totally agree with Richard, but especially with Christian when he says a happy team makes happy customers, and in the end, software is in this case, and I think I speak for all of our softwares, is an enabler in this happiness, because in the end you join the hospitality industry because you like hospitality, and that's what you want to focus on, and indeed profitability is of course in the end what makes it important for GMs, but in the end it's also the staff that needs to do all these jobs. So I think if we can help them focus on what's important, and if we can, let's say, take out of their hands a few things that can make it life difficult in a sense, and then I think we as a software succeed already dramatically in improving the staff's life, and of course get the results that the GMs want. So it's really about not just reporting, but also making sure that the staff can do what they need to do.
Yeah, no, that's very important, absolutely. And the mundane tasks are just that, they are mundane, and if you can get software to automate it, that's absolutely ideal. It's just going to save people leaps and bounds. So some really insightful information there. Thank you very much. So what would you say about having integrated systems? How can they optimize the daily chores and reduce your labor? Do you want to cover that first?
Well,
sorry.
Christian, you can go first, Christian. No problem.
Cool. Happy to take that one. I think integrated systems, the world as it used to be back in the day, you'd have one supplier that you would go to typically for 2 or 3 of the key systems. If you say, your sales, your labor, and your inventory tool. And as we go to a world where restaurateurs are expecting more a best of breed, and what do I mean by that? So that you're able to go to the best labor tool, S4, to the best inventory tool, Epic-based, to the best POS, whatever that might be. So that because each of those problems have become more and more complicated over time, there needs to be a specialization in terms of like being able to make sure that you've got that team focused on solving the labor problem, the inventory problem, the sales problem. But what that means is that you then have your data that is siloed in those 3 different systems ultimately. And the value here is really being able to see the data from all 3. So sales, labor, inventory, what you would refer to as a flash P&L, if you want. So being able to say sales minus labor minus inventory, so that you're able to see what is my labor as a percentage of sales, as well as my inventory as a percentage of sales, and not having to jump into 3 different systems to do that. And in particular, getting it in the hands of your GMs on their mobile. Because in order for data to be consumed by your team, it needs to be in real time. It needs to be to the right person, i.e. the GM, as quickly as possible, and also on the right device. Expecting your GM to be sitting at a computer when they're in a busy hospitality environment, it is much more comfortable for them to be seeing this on mobile, either on their way home or their way in or on their break, so they can sit at one of the tables and see this information. So really being able to bring all that data together and making it available to your teams very easily really unlocks a ton of inefficiencies.
Yeah, and absolutely, very much so. Richard.
I couldn't agree more with Christian. As a tech provider, our responsibility is to be able to move data really effectively between solutions. And if we have our labor data and we share that with Tenzo and they can use that to help create the flash P&L, well, perfect, because that's then enabling everything. I think the other bit that kind of as integrated solutions we do, and we spoke about this sort of a little bit in the prior question, was looking at how we reduce the mundane tasks. So one example for us would be that employees are created on our system because we're a people-based system and they need that for the payroll and everything else that we do, but we don't do everything. So we then share that employee created data, so like that new employee, with many other solutions. So we can create them as a user in the POS system. We can create them as a user in the learning and development solution. We can create them as a user in the communication solution, whichever of those that it might be, because we don't believe that a GM should be wasting their time creating an employee 4 different times or more, or many more, in many more different solutions. And I think there's probably many examples of that where we kind of go, there's a mundane task that can just be removed by us working better as integrated partners.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks for that. Carl.
Yeah, when you talk about integrated systems, I think the great thing about this is that they actually operate as one. Although they're different systems, they talk to each other in the background through APIs, and just they are complementary to each other. And at the same time, when you use these softwares, well, they're actually built by dedicated teams. So none of these systems are compromising on any element. The FMB software is built by a team of FMB software builders, and the labor software is built by a team of labor software builders. So they know exactly what they're doing, and they know, for example, in labor, there are specific laws you need to do. You need to comply to a lot of different stuff. At F&B, it's about allergens, it's about different stuff again. So all of this knowledge is in these teams, and that means, you know, you just don't have one company or one team working for you as a software, but you have, let's say, multiple teams, in this case 3 or 4 teams working for you. And then, you know, when these systems are integrated, it saves the team a massive amount of time, because, you know, they don't have to import, export the data. The data is seamlessly transported between one system and the other, and then you have a tool like Tenzo that lives, let's say, on top of that, you know, that makes that insightful. So it's really, you know, eliminating an IT team almost in a business, and you can actually rely again on specialists in our teams actually to do that for you, and that's why, you know, having an integrated system and looking, when you're looking for systems to support you, you definitely have to see, you know, which system works with which other system, because, you know, that's the real power of integrated systems. And yeah, and in the end, you know, you get that in a clean dashboard, whether it is in detail about labor in Nest Labor, or when it's in detail food cost at Epic Base, or when it's, you know, this business intelligence in Tenzo. You know, you have a lot of powerful tools at your fingertips, thanks to the fact that you're actually trusting a few businesses that work closely together. And we also understand that, you know, sometimes people make decisions and they say, yeah, but, you know, if I go with a you know, what we call a dinosaur in the market, you know, they do everything, and then, you know, before they know it, the whole business is integrated in one software, and you never get out of that. And, you know, there's a very big advantage of choosing multiple partners as well, because, you know, imagine you're not happy with the food costs, or how the food cost is calculated, or that software is working. You can switch that software. If you're not happy with your business intelligence, you could switch that. You have like building blocks, and, you know, ideally, when they work together, you will be happy, and that's what we all strive for. So we have an incentive to build the best possible software in our market in order to make you happy as a customer, and that's exactly what everybody is focusing on in their own domain, actually. Yeah, as for labor, Epic Base for food and beverage, and Tenzo for business intelligence. And bringing that together is really, you know, that's the strength of integrated systems.
That's excellent. So the eyes have it there. So well said, Carl. It's a very good statement on that. So, I mean, as it says here, is having systems integrated better than one system that can manage it all? Richard, your thoughts on that?
Listen, clearly where I sit is, I'm going to come up with a very biased view here, so it wouldn't be fair of me not to point that a little bit out. But we believe we've got a massive roadmap in people solutions for at least another 10 years worth of development, and way beyond that. And that's only where we're thinking about today. So we always believe that we'll be better focusing on people and being really creative and innovative in that space, because we're focused, we understand what we're doing, and we can really drive forward that part of the market space. I think where you have one provider, as Carl touched on, we've seen a few sort of providers in the space at the moment buying up lots of different bits of really good software, but the innovation seems to dry up at that point, and the focus seems to become onto growth. And actually, I think if I was an operator out there, I'd want to have best in breed solutions. But then I think, you know, if I'm going to do that, I need those best of breed solutions to be able to talk to each other and to be able to work really effectively with each other, because that's the way that tech works these days. You know, whether you want an Apple phone or a Samsung phone, the individual apps that sit within that phone all have to work brilliantly with it. And I kind of think, as we sort of go further down that technology journey, the way that we integrate with each other and others it becomes the really important bit for us, and we'll focus on what we do best, which is the people side of things.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Carl, do you want to add something further onto that?
Well, I think what Richard says about this innovation, that's actually indeed, I think, absolutely the truth. I mean, when you as a team, as a software company, you are always looking to accommodate new stuff and make sure that the wishes of the customer are fulfilled. And when you are focused on one domain, you can definitely get deeper into stuff and further, and that defines the innovation that you're looking for as a company. And yeah, I think that definitely is one of the advantages of having multiple systems integrated rather than one mastodontic kind of system that is unmanageable or has a lot of disadvantages in the end, because it's the innovation, as Richard says, has dried up in those companies.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Christian, your thoughts on that as well?
I'd only add one thing to, or just go one step beyond for this, is that what we tell all our customers is, choose whatever POS labor inventory tool you think is best for you, along the idea of best of breed. The important thing you need to make sure is that they have an open API, because anyone who will claim being able to do everything in those three areas and in the hospital, you do not know where the next innovation will get. But by having an open API, you know that they'll be able to work with wherever the next innovation comes from, and they'll be able to, and you basically get yourself, you future-proof yourself. You give yourself flexibility in the future to be able to work with whatever happens in the future. None of us sitting on this call will know everything that's going to be happening, where the next innovation will be. And by working with systems like this, you know that you'll be able to embrace those innovations as they come along.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. Thanks for that. Carl, don't you have an analogy about a football team or something?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think I always say, it's a little bit like you have to, in England, we're proud of that. We have a lot of Belgian football players, doing very well. So let me use a little bit a Belgian analogy in the UK. So actually, you want to buy the best possible team, and it's about getting the best defenders. It's about getting the best midfield, the best strikers together in one team. And if you have to shop around a little bit, and then you get to in the midfield, you can get a De Bruyne, and if you are in the attackers, you get the Lukaku, and maybe in defense, maybe one day Courtois returns to Chelsea. You never know, and then you get the best team possible, and that's how you win championships, and that's exactly what we can offer as integrated systems.
Listen, as an Arsenal fan, I disagree with Carl completely. But as a technical writer, I think the analogy is a fair one.
Maybe one day they get back to Arsenal, or they get to Arsenal.
It's a good job we got no Italians on the panel today as well, given the Euros, but there we go. Christian, you talked a little bit technical just then, an open API. Do you just want to explain to people what that is, perhaps, please? It's slightly above my head.
Yeah, no, very happy to. But basically, it's making sure you choose a system that has an interface that allows other systems to query from that interface. So it's basically a set of instructions. You can say, hey, I would like to know how much inventory I purchased on this date, and you can send that instruction and you get that back. Same with labor. You say, how much labor have I scheduled on this date, and then you get that information back. So it's that interface of being able to communicate between these different technology platforms.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you very much. So and I think Carl talked about eliminating the IT team at some stage, and I think a lot of operators would be absolutely delighted about that, but don't have the gumption to say it or do it, to be honest, because it's so reliant on that. But I know what you mean. So there we go. So that's very clear, and it makes sense there. But what advice would you be in terms of data-driven decision making through key metrics? Richard, do you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, listen, I think as tech providers, we've got a responsibility here to try and translate the mass amounts of data that we have into really useful bits of information. We're constantly trying to help our customers have more effective operations. We've got so much data, we don't, you could always get a little bit lost in it. And certainly our customers could get lost in it if you think about just how little, the small amount that we want to focus on. So our big challenge, and I suppose our responsibility to a certain extent, is how do we present the data in the very best of formats to enable operators to make the right decision to their business as quickly as possible. So our stance on this is, one, the presentation of the data, but also kind of whittling down what data to present. So that it's a small amounts of information that can make really big differences to people's restaurants. An example of this is, when we started in labour management, all everybody was focused about was what they were spending, and we kind of went, well, what they're spending is only one part of the equation. Really, how effectively they're spending it, i.e., when they're staffing, and how that correlates to when their trade occurs, was how we took that journey forward. And I kind of think we'll continue to take it forward, but we've got to be very careful not to over present too much data and confuse people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the old scenario where the breakfast chef in a hotel does his buffet in the old days when they had buffet, totally topped up at 7 o'clock in the morning. The first guest wasn't in till 8 o'clock in the morning. So it's about making best use. Carl, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it is really important that your key metrics, whether it's food cost or sales numbers or inventory or labor costs, when you get that data, you can actually zoom out of the day-to-day actions that you're doing and see the long-term business trends. And when you zoom out, you won't be making decisions based on gut feeling or just gut feeling. The data will actually help you point in the right direction. And when you look at food cost, for example, from a perspective of food, it's almost impossible to take the right decisions if you don't have the right insights in terms of popularity of dishes, the right margin, things like that. So for that reason, having a Miller matrix or a Boston consultancy graph at your fingertips to tell you which dishes are actually popular or which dish makes actually part of your profit and your revenue is really key. And without that data, I mean, it's like driving blind and trying, in the end of the month, you look at, oh yeah, I have this turnover and this food cost, so probably it's okay, but you don't know where it's coming from. So having that kind of insight really will drive your profit upwards, because I once was with a customer and he said, my chef, he took off the Caesar salad from the menu. And I asked him, why did you do that? Yeah, I was sick and tired of making it. And then the general manager said, yeah, but I mean, it's 60% of your revenue. So, I mean, there is a gut feeling of a chef, is sick and tired of making a certain dish. And then the general manager saying, yeah, but, thanks to Epic Days almost, it is, I can tell you that you have to keep making this dish, because that is the difference between winning or losing. So having these numbers is very, very important in order to make the right business decisions. And in your gut, you might be sick and tired of making a certain dish, but the numbers tell you definitely have to keep on making that.
Yeah, absolutely. You could say to the chef, I'm sick and tired of paying you, couldn't you, really? So he refuses to do that. But it's going back to the old days of menu engineering, and that's been long forgotten in lots of operations and businesses. And I remember teaching that in South Africa in the early 80s about menu engineering. It's so important. Christian, your take on that as well, please.
Yeah, I think so. I'll echo, what Richard and Carl were saying. The important thing, in my view, here is really making the data accessible. If every industry out there is collecting more and more and more data, but the way to make it actionable, and we really talk about actionable insights at Tenzo, is about making sure that the right data, so i.e. not too much of it, it lands in the hands of the right person who can do something about it at the right time. Because you could very easily overwhelm teams with too much data. So what we do with our customers when we onboard them is really talk to them about what important KPIs they are, and in particular with the GMs in the restaurant, we know they're extremely busy and they're not going to have time to go through reams and reams of data. So I say, what are the 3 or 4 KPIs you want them to focus on? And they might say, you know, average transaction value is really important. If I could increase that by £1, that's going to go a long way. Or, you know, my labor productivity, i.e. my sales divided my labor hours, or maybe, you know, my wastage percentage, as just naming 3. But it's important to really then be able to focus those teams around those 3 and making sure that they're looking at those on a regular basis. But if you had 10 of those, where do they start, right? How do they even go about, like, what do they optimize? So it's really the important thing here is getting all this complex data and making it as simple as possible for your GMs in your restaurants to be able to, like, take action on them.
Quite agree with that. Simple, straightforward information to action certainly made sense to me, and it still does. So yeah, thank you for that. So going on, really talking about historical data, so there's been a lot of talk about using historical data to forecast future sales. And I know forecasting this last 18 months has been really sticking your finger in the air because it's so difficult, but we are getting a sense of normality now in certain parts of the UK. Would you say that using historical data to forecast the sales in the future is fact or fiction, and does it actually work? Richard?
Yeah, listen, Alistair, you make a very valid point. And then the last 18 months, we've never seen such turbulence in terms of sales data. So trying to put all that together and think that you can forecast what's going to happen next would be pretty challenging. So if kind of take away the last 18 months in a normal sort of run-of-the-mill time where we would say that absolutely historical data does make part of your forecast, but how much of a part of your forecast, it really varies very much from site to site. We use an amount of AI to determine, when we're doing our forecasting, to determine which forecasting formula is most effective for any different business. So historical sales will play more into the mix at sometimes and less at others. So at the moment, you kind of go, actually, historical data is not really having much of an implication at all on forecasting future sales or future energies, but ordinarily it might have some more. And also it depends on the life cycle of a business as well. A brand new business versus one that's well established, these things sort of play in differently. But okay, to answer the question more directly, yes, it does, but to what level very much depends on the business.
And it'll take 6 months or so by the time we reset ourselves to see how it goes through, I'm sure, as well. So yeah, Carl, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, forecasting is, of course, you know, a little bit the holy grail. The more accurate the forecast is, the more, let's say, reassured or actionable you need to be in to get it better. But I think in the first step in you know, getting forward in your business is starting to record what you're doing. So that means that you have to know, and you have to work towards your labor and your scheduling and all these things. You have to work to get your inventory right and your ordering, and you have to standardize and centralize those things, because whatever you do and however you forecast, in the sense that you of course you need a lot of factors, and Tenzo is a specialist in that, in order to get, you know, external factors as well. But in the beginning, the groundwork is knowing what your business is doing and getting the right information from your own business. Data is key, and I think that is sometimes, you know, people look at software and maybe look at tedious tasks like scheduling, and sometimes it's easier to WhatsApp somebody than to, you know, schedule them through the software, and sometimes it's easier to call a supplier than sending an email or sending a supplier note or an order note. But in the end, I mean, you need to get the data in a certain format, and you need to work from there. And once you get that data, then of course, forecasting becomes possible. And that is exactly what I always tell to my customers. I mean, they dream of a castle with a lot of, whistles and bells and things like that. You're most of the time living in a hut. So let's move into a villa and make sure that you get the right data of what you're doing today, so you can act on your history. And then, of course, I mean, there's fantastic software out there, like the Tenzo software that starts interpreting these things, that understands the history, and then adds a lot of value and a lot of external factors in order to get an even more accurate forecast, because one Sunday is not the other Sunday. But it all starts with getting the right data in your system and using that data to go further along.
That's great. Thanks very much. I love some of your analogies. You're a lot of Englishness in there, Carl, actually, I have to say. Connections. Christian, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, everyone knows forecasting is very central to restaurants. And I think it comes back to the point of having a happy team. I remember when I ran my restaurants, forecasting was always the piece that GMs were most worried about. It's very difficult to do, honestly. You using last week or the last 4 weeks average is an approximation that a lot of people we work with before they start using Tenzo are relying on. The problem with that is that it doesn't take into consideration events like Mother's Day or Valentine's Day or bank holiday. And if you put yourself in the position of the GM, it's stressful, right? Because if they overestimate, then they'll get too much stock and too many people in, and the management will be upset with them because they've wasted resources. On the contrary, if they under forecast, then they don't have enough staff or enough stock, and the team is upset because they're having to rush and run harder, or you're calling someone at the last minute to come in, or you're calling a supplier to say, could you increase my order, etc. And that makes unhappy teams because there's no certainty. There's no, they know that they could come at the last minute, or there might not be enough food, and that the customers will complain, etc. So forecasting is central, not only to making sure that you run your business efficiently, but also that you keep your teams happy. And to specifically answer the question here, is historical piece here important? Of course, it's fundamental to wanting it. In any time series forecasting, you have to use the past in order to predict the future. Is it the only element? Of course not. Should you ignore some portions of data because there's been very unusual data? Of course. Should the models evolve and be able to train on more recent data than more historical data because more recent data is more relevant? Of course. Elements like weather, events, number of bookings also come in. So historical data is fundamental to it, but it is far from being the only element. But I can tell you, by getting a good forecasting tool in place, you will not only make your business more efficient, but you will make your teams a lot happier.
Which is key to everything, isn't it? You need happy teams and an efficient business, and it's a win-win situation all the way through. That's fabulous, very good. So I've got a couple of questions that have come through here. The first one is, where will the viewers get to know information on your companies? Have you got some information coming through latterly? Will it go out with the information from the webinar, your web addresses, web domains?
Hopefully they'll go out with the webinar, but I mean, ours is really straightforward. It's just s4labor.co.uk. I'm guessing everyone would have thought everyone else's is as similar.
Fine. Okay. Well, that's great. Thank you for that. And another question here has come through saying, do you share a common dashboard? How does it work? All your information integrating into one screen or something? Christian, can you pick that up?
Yeah, happy to. Yes, so if you had S4 Epic Base and a POS that we integrate with, you would be able to see in Tenzo, both on mobile and web, the data from all three systems in one consolidated dashboard, if you want.
That's great. And so the $64 million question, and I'll come back to you in a second, Carl, is what are the most important key metrics you need to be looking at on that? Carl, do you want to kick off with yours?
Well, yes, I think one of the we already talked about it. One of the most important key metrics is your BCG matrix. It's which dishes are the most popular ones and which dishes are the most profitable ones. And if you succeed in pushing your dishes or your customers to dishes or to products that are profitable and popular, I think the basis of success is made. And then, of course, we have a few extra metrics. It is about making sure you don't have too much debt capital in your business, because you want to have capital money to that is free flowing, and so that's another key metric. And of course, if you understand and if you know what you are ordering, where you're ordering, what are your most important suppliers, what is the change of your acquisition cost of food, yeah, that is something that is quite important as well, because you will actually see that everything is getting more expensive every so many times. So you have to take that into account, and in the end, adjust your pricing towards your customer. And I think that especially after Corona and where there is this massive understanding that it's not just revenue, it's also about costs. I think it's out of the question that we will go into more, let's say, regular changes in pricing towards the customer, because we're just restaurateurs and GMs. They now know what the cost of their dish is, and they now know what the cost of their personnel is. So they will actually act on that, and yeah, in the end, ask this from their customers. So these are key metrics for me that are crucial in order to become a profitable and healthy business. And I think, and then I speak maybe for the Belgian market, but the bankruptcy of hospitality is gigantic, and not just through the pandemic, but just in general. I mean, it's a high turnover business, not just in personnel, but also in businesses. So I mean, the more insights, the more healthy health checks that you actually can do on your own business, the healthier the business and the sector in general will become, and in the end, that's good for everybody. And I think we can contribute massively to that.
Thank you. Richard, your key metrics.
Listen, we do labour, so what you spend on your staff cost has always got to be the key number. Sort of slightly scoffed at it earlier because we think we've taken that debate a bit further forward, and I would encourage everybody to take that further forward as well. But ultimately, what you're spending on labour has to be the biggest metric to look at when it comes to staff management. Knowing that in advance of when you've spent it really helps. Certainly knowing it quickly after you've spent it helps. But we would like to take that debate further forward and go not just what you've spent, but how effectively you've spent it. But ultimately, kind of, if you're going to look at one number, it's how much you spent, and ideally before you spent it.
Yeah, that's very sensible. I mean, for the hoteliers on the call here, they're very familiar with the term RevPAR, revenue per available room. Certainly in my hoteling days, I was looking at revenue per available chair. Is that a metric that's used these days? RevPatch?
Yeah, or by, we see it often by square foot. So revenue per square foot is one that a lot of our customers look at, just to see, so they can compare different sites. We actually had one site that then they identified it was pretty low, and then they ripped out this office space they had, and they made a new kitchen and started running virtual brands from it, and increased that massively. But yeah, I think that one's important. I think really, if you've got one, you should have one really per sales, per labor, per inventory, right? And so depending on what your view is, on labor, it will often be like productivity, so sales divided by labor hours, or cost of labor as a percentage of sales is typically ones that we see very, very often. On the labor front, cost of goods sold as a percentage of sales, or maybe it's your wastage as a percentage of purchases, depending on your point of view there. And then on sales, average transaction value, it often figures up there because it gives you a good idea of like how, if your team is upselling correctly. and then revenue per square foot to get an idea of like how are they doing compared to other sites in that way. So as long as you've got the 3 key levers that you're looking at and numbers on those, and I totally agree, Richard, on your point of being able to see that ahead of time. So being able to see what's my planned labor cost as a percentage of forecast sales, for example, to make sure that given what the GM thinks they're going to make next week, have they put the right amount of staff as a starting point?
Yeah, that's absolutely crucial on that. Thank you. So any real life instances that your customers are doing at the moment that overcoming the staff shortages by implementing the software that you sell? Richard, have you got any tips that you can share? Not confidential, obviously.
Listen, I mean, it's tough out there at the moment, and we're speaking to no end of people that are struggling not just for staff, but as Christian touched on earlier, struggling for food availability and drink availability. So it's a pretty tough space. I kind of think if there's one bit that it puts to the top of the agenda, and I guess it's kind of summarised in what we're trying to talk about today, is looking after your employees, keeping hold of those people that you value, and helping them to be the best that they can. And I think we're seeing quite a few examples of people going above and beyond to try and do that. I mean, there's been well documented in the press some of the attraction strategies that certain restaurant groups have had to try and to deploy to bring people in. I think even Tesco's were offering extraordinary amounts of money for delivery drivers and the like. But kind of the best thing to do is to keep hold of the people that you've got and look after them as best you can.
Yeah, thank you. Carl, any tips and tricks from your clients?
Well, what we see is actually it's always a good time to start implementing systems. I mean, the hospitality business, you're always busy and you're always understaffed. So any time is as good as this time to start with digitizing and getting these insights, because setting up systems, that takes time and it takes effort, and I mean, it's not from today to tomorrow, but once you've set it up and once you have these systems in place, you get tremendous value out of them. And of course, I mean, it is sometimes easier or let's say difficult to get over that starting point and say I'll do it tomorrow, but you have to get through that and just get going. And we see that you can do that in multiple different ways, and we see that customers either decide to start small and then grow it along the way, or they hire or try to hire a certain expertise, or they rely on us to do it for them. I mean, all of these things are possible, and it's just a matter of taking the decision to go forward. Because if you don't go forward, if you don't take the decision, you stay where you are and you go actually backwards, and you will lose in the end, because there are businesses that are digitizing, that are getting that data, that are getting the edge through that data, and they will be the ones that win. So in the end, it is not just about do I do it or don't I do it? It's just when do you do it, and then now is as good as any time.
Fabulous, thank you very much. And Christian, for you, in terms of tips and tricks.
Yeah, I think I like to say that the pandemic has dragged the restaurant industry into the 21st century, kicking and screaming in a lot of ways. People have had to digitize it during the pandemic. Do click and collect, do deliveries, etc. And they've had to operate differently. And I think there's really no going back, really. You are going to have a lot more data to handle. You're going to have to operate efficiently, because already we're seeing that there's staff shortages. There are going to be a number of challenges. Unfortunately, the restaurant industry is not totally out of it yet. And by putting in the right systems now and biting that bullet and making sure that you've got the right tech stack, as we refer to it, so the right sales, labor, inventory tool, BI tool over that, you will be astonished about how much more efficient you will run the business ultimately. There is so much return on investment on all these solutions, once implemented correctly, that's I would encourage everyone to jump on it ASAP.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. So that's really useful. And that really sort of wraps up the webinar this afternoon. Got no more questions coming at this stage. Gentlemen, it's been fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. And it's a great insight into how the world has shaped and how you're working with software and using it to your advantage is going to help the hoteliers and the restaurateurs out there. So it's very, very useful indeed. I'll just have a little plug for some other Institute events coming up, if I may. This is my Pearl and Dean bit that those of you in the UK will understand. They're advertising agents in cinemas. Richard certainly does. We have our regular coffee call this Thursday, 10:30, every Thursday morning, and everyone is welcome to attend. There's no fee to attend. You don't need to be a member, and it's about joining in and just chewing the cud and seeing what's happening in the world. So that's coming up later this week and every Thursday. Then our branches, the London branch has got some events coming up in August and September. And in September, for those of you in the UK, we're attending and exhibiting at the Universal Cookery and Food Festival, which is taking place in Warwickshire on the 14th of September. The West of England branch is launching their network in September too, and then the Institute has an event at the Shard on the 20th of September, Above and Beyond. That's the first of our in-person networking events, and we're all so keen to get back to in-person. Then there'll be a series of new webinars coming out for the autumn as well, and they'll be all advertised on our website. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It's been really insightful and useful information. Stay well, enjoy the rest of your holidays, those of you who've broken your holidays for this. And those of you attending, thank you very much, stay well, and we'll see you soon. Thank you then. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks. You.